The world knew him as the Little Tramp, a master of silent comedy, a genius who could make millions laugh with a tilt of his hat and a twitch of his cane. But beneath the carefully constructed mask of his on-screen persona, and the even more polished one he wore in Hollywood, Charles Chaplin was a man haunted by ghosts. He was a king in his own cinematic kingdom, a titan of control. But that same iron grip he held on his films, he also held on his own heart, sealing away a grief so profound it could not be named. He had built an empire on laughter, but his soul was a silent, empty stage. It was a night of pure spectacle, a grand charity gala held in his honor. The ballroom was a sea of shimmering silks and glittering jewels, the air thick with the scent of perfume and power. Chaplin, impeccably dressed in a bespoke tuxedo, stood at the podium. He was not the tramp now. He was Chaplin, the powerful director, the visionary, the man who had conquered a world he was once too poor to even dream of. But as he looked out at the adoring crowd, his eyes held a flicker of something deeply broken, something the stage lights couldn't quite hide. He was a perfect suit wrapped around a shattered man. He was about to deliver a speech on the importance of giving, but what he truly wanted to give was a piece of his own pain, if only he knew how. Just before he spoke, a young stagehand, a humble seamstress with calloused hands and a face that could easily blend into the background, walked past. She carried a basket of thread and pins, her presence as silent and unassuming as a whisper. As she passed, her basket brushed against his tuxedo, a tiny, almost imperceptible contact. Chaplin didn't even flinch. He cleared his throat, a silence falling over the crowd as they waited for the master to speak. He raised a hand in a gesture of grand humility, a motion he had practiced 1,000 times. But as his arm ascended, the impossible happened. A faint, almost unheard rip echoed in the vast silence. It was the sound of a seam giving way. The tailor-made tuxedo, the symbol of his perfection and control, tore open at the shoulder, a gash of white shirt visible beneath the pristine black fabric. A collective gasp went through the audience, a catastrophic wardrobe malfunction. This was the kind of moment that would send most men into a spiral of humiliation and panic. But Chaplin didn't react with horror. Instead, a strange, almost painful smile spread across his face. It was not the comedic grin of the tramp, nor the practiced smile of the Hollywood magnate. It was the smile of a man who had been holding his breath for a lifetime and had finally found a moment to exhale. A smile that said, "It's all falling apart, and maybe that's exactly what I needed." The crowd, confused at first, began to murmur. They expected a joke, a bit of physical comedy, but all they saw was a man standing there, a rip in his suit and an unreadable emotion on his face. He stood there for a long moment, a statue of vulnerability on a stage of triumph. But what if this mistake was exactly what he needed? What if the tear wasn't a disaster, but a divine intervention? And what if the woman who saw it all happen held the key to his greatest secret? Stick around and don't forget to subscribe to Uncover the Truth. Backstage, the serene atmosphere of the gala was shattered. Chaplin, his face contorted with a fury that had nothing to do with the torn suit, stormed off the stage. He was no longer the graceful master, but a storm of raw, uncontained rage. He paced the small dressing room, his hands balled into fists, the rip in his tuxedo a glaring wound. "Sabotage!" he hissed to his assistant. It had to be sabotage. There is no other explanation. The assistant, a nervous young man, fumbled for a new jacket, but Chaplin waved him away. The moment was about something else entirely. It was about the loss of control. The feeling that something he had so meticulously built could be undone by a simple, insignificant thread. The young seamstress, the same one who had passed by him, knocked timidly on his door. His assistant tried to turn her away, but Chaplin's gaze was fixed on her. She held his old, discarded jacket, a needle and thread in her hand. "I can fix it, Mr. Chaplin," she said in a voice as soft as the fabric she worked with. "It's a simple mend." "A simple mend," he scoffed, his voice dripping with venom. "That suit was made with the finest silk, the strongest thread. It was perfect. You touched it. It was a flaw you introduced." The seamstress, whose name was Eleanor, didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, her eyes holding a depth of wisdom that contradicted her humble station. "It was not a flaw, sir. It was a release." The tension was too great. The fabric was so tightly woven, so perfectly stretched, that it could not withstand the natural motion of your arm. It had to rip to let go of the pressure. It was not a weakness in the fabric. It was a strength. Chaplin froze. Her words, so simple and yet so profound, felt like a slap to the face. He wanted to rage, to dismiss her as an imbecile, but something in her calm gaze held him captive. He looked at the rip in his jacket, then at his own clenched fist. The tuxedo was a metaphor, he realized, a perfect, beautiful prison he had built for himself, a shield of control to protect the broken man. Beneath, he had spent his entire life pulling the threads of his past so tight that he had left no room for himself to breathe. He had survived poverty, a difficult childhood, the loneliness of his early career, by building a wall of perfection. And now, this tiny, insignificant woman was telling him that the wall had a crack. He turned away from her, his rage giving way to a sickening wave of fear. Fear of the vulnerability her words implied. Fear of what would happen if he let go of the control. The silence in the room was heavy, filled with the unspoken weight of his emotional baggage. He could simply dismiss her, put on a new jacket, and return to the stage, pretending the incident never happened. Or he could listen to her, a stranger who saw the rip in his suit as an opening, not a flaw. The choice was a terrifying dilemma: to maintain his safe, painful world of control, or to risk everything for the possibility of a cure he didn't even know existed. He looked at the discarded suit, then at his own trembling hands. He had built his kingdom on control, but what if the price had been his own soul? What if the tear was the universe's way of telling him that his greatest strength was not in holding on, but in letting go? The silence was broken by Eleanor's soft voice. "Sometimes," she said, "the strongest things in the world are the ones that learn to give, to bend, and not just to break." She picked up his torn jacket, holding it as if it were a sacred artifact. "A tear is just a story that's beginning. What will you write next?" It was a simple question, but it cut through the decades of his carefully constructed silence. "The best is yet to come." Chaplin couldn't shake her words. "A tear is just a story. That's beginning." He looked at the torn tuxedo, no longer a symbol of his humiliation, but a testament to his pain. He had become a prisoner of his own success. He had believed that his power came from his ability to manipulate the world, to make people see only what he wanted them to see. But now this humble woman, this invisible figure, was showing him that his greatest illusion was the one he had cast upon himself. Eleanor, sensing his change of heart, led him to a forgotten corner of the dressing room, a place filled with old props and discarded costumes from his early films. She pointed to a tattered box, its lid covered in a layer of dust. "I found this while preparing the set," she said. "My grandmother, she used to be a seamstress for the theatres in London. When I started here, she told me, 'You might meet the most famous man in the world, and he will look at you, but he will not see you, because you are a shadow, just as I was.' And then she told me a story about a young actor, a poor boy who had nothing but his dreams and a ragged old costume that was always falling apart. She said she mended it so many times she knew every stitch by heart." Eleanor reached into the box and pulled out a familiar yet heartbreakingly different object, the original Tramp costume. The jacket was frayed, the trousers worn thin at the knees, the famous shoes scuffed and faded, and everywhere there were patches, little, imperfect patches that told a story of a life lived on the edge, of a boy who had to fight for every inch of success. Chaplin gasped, a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He reached out and touched the old jacket. It was not the perfect silk tuxedo, but it was his. It was him. He saw the patches his grandmother had sewn, each one a testament to his own resilience, a map of his own journey. The tuxedo was the man he had become. This old costume was the boy he had been, the boy who knew that life was messy, unpredictable, and imperfect. The boy who had learned to find the humor in a torn pair of pants because he had no other choice. He looked at the tear in his tuxedo and then back at the patches on the Tramp costume. He realized that the tear wasn't a flaw. It was a connection. It was the first honest thing to happen to him in decades. He had been so busy creating a perfect facade that he had forgotten the beautiful, raw humanity that had made him who he was. The moment felt like a reunion with his own soul. The pain he had been carrying, the unspeakable grief, suddenly felt less like a heavy burden and more like an old friend. He hadn't been suffering from a lack of perfection. He had been suffering from a lack of connection with himself and with the world. He now understood that his power was not in his invulnerability, but in his capacity to feel, to break, and to heal. The tuxedo was his prison. The old patched costume was his freedom. He finally saw that what he had been seeking, the peace and the release from his sorrow, wasn't found in control and power, but in the simple act of embracing his own messy, imperfect humanity. Chaplin took a deep breath, his heart finally feeling full after so many years of emptiness. He looked at Eleanor, a humble seamstress who, with a single act of kindness and a simple truth, had seen him more clearly than anyone ever had. He picked up his tuxedo, the torn seam now a badge of honor. He walked back to the stage, the audience, expecting a new tuxedo, an apology, and a flawlessly executed speech, held its collective breath. But Chaplin stood at the podium, a single spotlight illuminating the tear in his jacket. He didn't speak of charity or of triumph. He spoke of threads and of tears. "For so long," he began, his voice surprisingly raw and honest, "I believed that perfection was everything, that a man's worth was in how impeccably he was dressed, how flawlessly he performed, how tightly he held the reins of his life. I believed that every thread must be in its place, every seam perfectly sewn." He gestured to the tear in his suit. But tonight, something happened. and for the first time in a very long time, I felt relief. This tear is not a flaw. It is a story. It is the story of a man who tried so hard to be perfect that he forgot how to be human. A silence fell over the room, different from before. It was not the expectant hush of a crowd waiting for a performance, but the profound silence of a crowd touched by a truth. He talked about his early days, about the constant struggle, about the clothes that were always falling apart, about the patches that were not a sign of poverty, but a testament to life's relentless forward motion. The tear in his tuxedo was a reminder that the most beautiful stories are often found in the most unexpected places. "We all have tears in our lives," he said, his voice now a gentle whisper. "Moments where we thought we were broken, where we felt exposed. But I've learned tonight that those aren't moments of weakness. They are moments of redemption. They are the places where our true humanity shines through. And tonight, for the first time, I am not the master of the stage. I am just a man with a torn suit, and I have never felt more complete." The silence hung in the air for a moment, and then a single person began to clap. Then another, and another. Soon the entire room erupted in a thunderous, emotional standing ovation. It was not for the tramp, not for the director, but for the man who had finally shown them the beautiful, flawed, and utterly human heart beneath the perfect facade. The tear that should have been a disaster had become the greatest act of his life. If this story taught us anything, it's that true perfection isn't about flawless control, but about embracing the beautiful, messy tears in our own lives. What part of the story most touched you? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe for more untold stories of the legends who shaped our world.